I'm bringing into Dr. Theo Acheampong in here very briefly. But before I bring him in, I want you to take a listen to this, that our situation is not one that we are talking about locally, and that among our peers internationally, we have become the butt of jokes about the way we are managing our economy. Dr. Donald Kaberuka, a former president of the African Development Bank Group, cited Ghana, he didn't want to mention the name Ghana, as an example of a promising economy that is now failing and resorting to the IMF for rescue. He was speaking at a conference of President Paul Kagame's Liberation Party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front in Kigali, as it celebrated its 35th anniversary. And Evans Mensah has been asking, who has been in, Rwanda, has been asking Ghana if we could take some lessons from their economic management module, not their democracy, quote-unquote democracy or political system. If you hear anybody tell you that story that Evans is saying we should have a dictator, they are telling a lie. He doesn't say any of that, close to that in his report. Let's listen to Dr. Donald Kaberuku.
That, for example, a country in West Africa, please no names, which was the first one to go to the IMF and begin journey of economic reforms, is back to the IMF today. Please, no names. Why? A combination of domestic indiscipline, macroeconomic indiscipline, and these external shocks. So as a result, they have lost what I call political space, fiscal space, policy space. The decisions they're now implementing are not their decisions. Why? Because during the days when things were very good, they did all the wrong things. They ticked all the wrong boxes. Massive borrowing, for example, massive spending, huge levels of the deficit, without building the resilience for when the days will be difficult. I can think now of about 14 countries in Africa who are in that phase. So the first thing I think our message we're passing here is that restoring that degree of economic independence begins by economic discipline.
Right. Dr. Theo Acheampong, yes, briefly, what will be your comment or position on this? The business leaders are unanimous. They are speaking as never before in this country, saying what you are doing, you're going to muzzle, you're going to kill businesses even further.
Good morning. I understand where the business leaders are coming from, particularly given the environment that we find ourselves in with high inflation, the cost of borrowing up, and both Humphrey and the Gutta president have been at length to explain these issues. And of course, other people have also raised these concerns. But the point really also for me is that we need to make some trade-offs, right? So the short-term trade-offs, which is about increasing our revenue base, and particularly the government wanting to increase their tax to GDP from 13 to about 18% in the next couple of years. And then the long-term trade-offs about the overall growth of the economy and the ability to create jobs. That's the context within which I analyze these issues from. So if we take the three bills specifically, there are some of them that I actually support, and then others that I don't. And I'll explain that briefly in a moment. So the exercise duty bill and the details underpinning the bill, if you actually read the details, a number of the products that the taxes are going up is to do with things like spirits, with wines, with malt drinks, and with sweetened beverages and e-cigarettes and things like that. And we do know that these actually are having quite serious health consequences on the general population. So from a sort of health policy point of view, I support the attempt to actually raise the exercise duties on a number of these, line items for the malt drinks, the wines, and the spirits. Call it like a sugar tax in a sense, right? And then the same thing with the tobacco. Same argument could be made for the increment or the adjustment in some of the income taxes. But where I disagree with the government really is on the growth and the sustainability levy. Mr. Kwame Fianim talked about the excessive taxation. Interestingly, this levy, and it's important that our viewers understand this, this is actually not new. It is a metamorphosis of the fiscal stabilization levy that we've had over the years. So you can go all the way back to 2001 when we passed the National Reconstruction Levy, right? And at that time, it was a similar thing where some companies, with the exception of, I think it was banks and rural and community banks, that had an exemption from that levy, and they were paying an amount which worked all the way through from 2001 to 2006. And then we made an amendment to it and even collected more, but this time around included or expanded the scope to include things like insurance companies, breweries, banks, inspection and evaluation companies, and you name it. Then between 2010 to 2019, we made further adjustments or amendments to this National Reconstruction Levy, which became a National Fiscal Stabilization Levy in 2009. And then subsequently in 2023 now, we are proposing to change a bit of the name from this fiscal stabilization into growth and sustainability levy. So my point is that this levy has always been on our books in one shape or form over the last 22 years. The issue is that the import of the levy or the act is always meant to be temporary, but typically what is meant to be temporary now becomes permanent. So even this 2023 to 2025 timeline that the government is talking about for this new growth sustainability levy, I doubt that at the end of 2025 it will be off the books. It's very much going to be tweaked and it's still going to stay on our books. The details of the growth and sustainability levy and what the government wants to collect, I see some implementation challenges there, right? So they've categorized the companies into three bands. Group A or Category A, which includes the banks, the non-banks, the insurance companies, the people that already were paying the fiscal stabilization levy, the earlier one. Then there's two new additions, which is the inclusion of the mining and then the oil and gas companies. And for them, they're meant to pay 1% of their gross production. And there's a third category of 2.5% of profit before tax on any other entity or company that does not fall in the first two categories. So you see here that the scope is being widened to capture pretty much every company within the economy. But the issue is the issue of the excessive taxation, and specifically for the mining and the upstream companies, I struggle to see how the government is actually going to ask them to pay this tax because they have existing agreements, and within those agreements, you have these fiscal stabilization provisions that says that the government cannot go back and change or even impose future tax terms that would make the cost of doing business for them quite difficult. So most likely we see some of them, actually resorting to arbitration and triggering those clauses within their respective contract. Because the 1% tax that the government is charging on these extractive companies, in very simple terms, and again, for the purposes of our listeners, it is working like a royalty, right? Because these are not allowed to be deducted against their future corporate income taxes. So they would very much fight this, I think, tooth and nail. So in essence, what I see really is that the 4 billion target that the government has put together to raise from these three new tax handles, most likely it may not meet that 4 billion target. It would raise some money, definitely, but that 4 billion target may become a bit challenging to meet. But the short-term priority for the government really is to raise new or more revenue. There are other things that we can discuss around the expenditure and you name it. But this is where really the sort of policy drive is.
All right. Finally, what do you say to, what would be a comment on what Kwame Pinning has just told us? And he ends by clearly being unequivocal that the president should not even assent to this. And you know, there's a man of God who said to me that this is like what happened in the Bible. You know, remember the rebellion against Rehoboam? He told the people that my father's finger is thicker than, you know, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Whereas my father, you know, burdened you with a heavy yoke, he said, I will add to your yoke. Whereas my father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. Is that what is going on? And the system, the refrain we hear is that reduce, you know, your own expenditure. Cut your coat according to your cloth. But that is not going on.
Yeah, look, the yoke is heavy. We have been burdened for a very long time, and it continues to be the case. I realistically don't see the president not signing onto this bill. We've got to be real here. I think there's an avenue for the president
They actually brought into parliament a sick man so that he could vote, because the minority were determined to vote against it.
It shows how dire the situation is in terms of meeting these benchmarks to get the IMF program going. What I think can be done, right, is some tweaks or an amendment to the bill, particularly the growth and sustainability bill. So, for example, it should be possible for the companies to reclaim these taxes back for the purposes of corporate income taxation, right? That would reduce or lessen the burden in a sense, but also improve the overall business environment. But the idea of actually scrapping it, given our history and what I've shown you, that this law or bill has been in some shape or form on our books for the last 22 years, I don't think it's going to be scrapped. But there's an avenue to tweak some component of it to ensure that you can, one, meet the target, but you can also get the compliance or the enforcement that you need from it.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Theo Acheampong is a political risk analyst, very, very familiar with particularly the oil and gas industry, and has authored a book in that regard. Now,